Outside the Piano-Moon wind tunnel, Pokler has come to stand at night, next to the great sphere, 40 feet high, listening to the laboring pumps as they evacuate the air from the white sphere. 5 minutes of growing void. Then one terrific gasp. 20 seconds of supersonic flow. Then the fall of the shutter and the pump starting up again. He has listened and taken it to imply his own cycle of shuttered love, growing empty over the year for 2 weeks in August, engineered with the same care. He has smiled and drunk toast, and traded barracks humor with Major Weissmann, while all the time, behind the music and the giggling, he could hear the flesh of pieces moved in darkness in winter across the marshes and mountain chains of the board. Watched run after run the Hal model result out of the wind tunnel, showing how the net normal force would be distributed over the rocket's length for hundreds of different Mach numbers. Seen the true profile of the rocket warped and travestied, a rocket of wax, humped like a dolphin at around caliber 2, necking down toward the tail, which was then stretched up, impossibly, in a high point with a lower shoulder aft it, and seen how his own face might be plotted, not in light, but in net forces acting upon it from the flow of Reich and coercion and love it moved through, and known that it must suffer the same degradation as death will warp face to skull. In 43, because he was away at Zwolfkinder, Pokler missed the British air raid on Piano-Moon. Returning to the station as soon as he came in sight of the foreign workers' quarters at Transenheide, razed and smashed, bodies still being dug from the wreckage, a terrible suspicion began and would not be put down. Weissmann was saving him for something, some unique destiny. Somehow the man had known the British would bomb that night, known even in 39, and so arranged the tradition of August furlough, year after year, but all toward protecting Pokler from that one bad night. Not quite balanced. A bit paranoid, yes, but the thought purred on his brain, and he felt himself turning to stone. Smoke seeped from the earth, charred trees fell as he watched, at no more than a breath of the direction of the sea. Powdered dust rose up at every footfall, turning clothes white, faces to masks of dust. The farther up the peninsula, the less damage. A strange gradient of death and wreckage, south to north, in which the poorest and the most helpless got it worse, as, indeed, the gradient was to run east to west in London a year later, when the rockets began to fall. Most of the casualties had been among foreign workers, a euphemism for civilian prisoners brought in from countries under German occupation. The wind tunnel and the measuring house were untouched, and pre-production works only slightly damaged. Pokler's colleagues were outside, scientist housing, which had been hit, phantoms moving in, morning fog still not burned off, washing up in buckets of beer because the water was still out. They stared at Pokler, failing, enough of them to keep accusation out of their faces. "I wish I could have missed this. Dr. Thale's dead. How is Fairyland, Pokler?" "I'm sorry," he said. It wasn't his fault. The others were silent, some watching, some still in shock from the night. Mondoggin showed up then. "We're exhausted. Could you come with me to pre-production? A lot has to be sorted out. We need a hand." They shuffled along, each in his own dust cloud. "It was terrible," Mondoggin said. "All of us have been under some strain." "They sounded like I'd done it." "You feeling guilty because you weren't here?" "I'm wondering why I wasn't here, that's all." "Because you were in Zwolfkinder," replied the enlightened one. "Don't invent complications." He tried not to. That was Weissmann's job, wasn't it? Weissmann was the sadist. He had responsibility for coming up with new game variations, building toward a maximum cruelty in which Pokler would be unlaid to nerve vessels and tendons, every last convolution of brain flattened out in the radiance of the black candles, nowhere to shelter, entirely his master's possession. The moment in which he is defined to himself at last. This is what Pokler could feel waiting now, a room he'd never seen, a ceremony he couldn't memorize in advance. There were false alarms. Pokler was almost sure once during the winter, during the test series at Blizna. They had moved east into Poland to fire over land. The shots from Piano-Moon were all out to sea, and there'd been no way to observe the re-entry of the A4. Blizna was almost exclusively an SS project, part of Major General Kammler's empire building. The rocket at that point was plagued by an airburst problem in its terminal phase. The vehicle blew apart before reaching the target. Everyone had an idea. It might be an overpressure in the liquid oxygen tank, perhaps because the rocket coming down was lighter by 10 tons of fuel and oxidizer. The shift in the center of gravity was making it unstable. Or perhaps the insulation on the alcohol tank was at fault, somehow allowing residual fuel to be burned on re-entry. This was Pokler's reason for being there. By then, he was no longer in the propulsion group, or even working as a designer. He was in the materials office, expediting the procurement of various plastics for insulation, shock absorption, gasketry, exciting stuff. The orders to Blitzno were strange enough to be Weismann's work. The day Pokler went out to sit in the Polish meadows at that exact spot where the rocket was supposed to come down, he was certain. Green rye and low hills for miles all around. Pokler was by a small trench, the Sarnaki target area, pointing his binoculars south toward Blitzno like everybody else, waiting. Erwartung in the crosshairs, with the just-sprung rye blowing, its gentler nap being brushed up by the wind. Look down at this countryside, down through rocket miles of morning space, the many shades of forest green, Polish farmhouses white and brown, dark eels of rivers catching the sun at their curves. And at the very center down there, in the holy X, Pokler, crucified, invisible at first look, but in a moment, now beginning to resolve as the fall gathers momentum. But how can he believe in its reality up there? Insects whine, the sun is almost warm, he can gaze off at the red earth and millions of blowing stalks, and fall nearly into a light trance. In shirt sleeves, with his bony knees pointing up, the gray suit jacket wrinkled years beyond the pressing, bundled under his ass to soak up the dew. The others he came out there with are dotted here about ground zero, blithe Nazi buttercups. Binoculars sway from slate-colored horsehide straps around their necks. The Ascania crew fuss with their equipment, and one of the SS liaison men, Weismann isn't here, keeps looking at his watch, then at the sky, then the watch, the crystal becoming in brief flashes on and off, a nacreous circle binding together the hour in the fleecy sky. Pokler scratches at a graying 48-hour beard, bites at lips very chapped as if he has spent most of the late winter outside. He has a winter look. Around his eyes, over the years, has grown a ruinous system of burst capillaries, shadows, folds, crow's feet, a ground that by now has gathered in the simple direct eyes of his younger and poorer days. No. Something was in them, even then, something others saw and knew they could use, and found to. Something Pokler missed. He spent enough of his life looking into mirrors he really ought to remember. The airburst, if it happens, will be in visual range. Abstractions, math, models are fine, but when you're down to it and everybody's hollering for a fix, this is what you do. You go out and sit exactly on the target within different shallow trenches for shelter, and you watch it in the silent fire bloom of its last few seconds and see what you will see. Chances are astronomically against a perfect hit. Of course, that is why one of the safest spots is at the center of the target area. Rockets are supposed to be like artillery shells. They disperse about the aiming point in a giant ellipse, the ellipse of uncertainty. But Pokler, though trusting as much as any scientist in uncertainty, is not feeling too secure here. It is after all his own personal ass whose quivering sphincter is centered right on ground zero. And there is more to this than ballistics. There is Weismann. Any number of chemists and materials people know as much about insulation as Pokler. Why should he have been picked? Unless, somewhere in his brain now, two foci sweep together and become one. Zero ellipse, a single point, a live warhead, secretly loaded, special bunkers for everyone else. Yes, that's what he wants. All tolerances and the guidance cooperating towards a perfect shot, right on top of Pokler. Ah, Weismann, your endgame lacks finesse. But there were never spectators and judges, not in all this time, and whoever said the end could not be this brutal. Paranoia has rushed Pokler, drowned him down to the temples and skull. He may have shit, he can't tell. His pulse thuds in his neck, his hands and feet ache. The black-suited blonde enforcers look on, their metal insignia twinkle, low hillside lie under early sun. All the field glasses stare south. The aggregate is en route, nothing can be changed. No one else here cares for the penetralia of the moment or last mysteries. There have been too many rational years. The paper has piled too thick and far. Pokler cannot reconcile, not really, his dream of the perfectly victimized with the need bred into him to take care of business, nor see how these may be one and the same. The A4 must, after all, go out in the field very soon. This failure rate must be brought down, and so those who've come are here, and if this is a massive failure of vision, this morning in the Polish meadow, if no one, not even the most paranoid, can see anything at all beyond the stated requirements, certainly it's not unique to this time, this place, where the eyes cupped against the black binoculars are looking only for the day's reluctant virgin, as the witty rocketeers have dubbed their problem rockets, to announce herself, to note where, forward to aft, the trouble may be, the shape of a vapor trail, the sound of the burst, anything that might help. At Sarnaki, as the records tell it, The rocket came down that day with the usual double blast, a streak of white condensation in the blue sky, another premature airburst. Steel fragments fell 100 feet away from the 0 point, slashing into the rye like hail. Pokler saw the explosion no more than anyone else. He was never sent out again. The SS people watched him get to his feet and stretch, and slowly move off with the others. Weismann would get his report. New varieties of torture would be coming. But inside Pokler's life, on no record but his soul, his poor, harassed German soul, the time base has lengthened and slowed. The perfect rocket is still up there, still descending. He still waits, even now, alone at Solfkinder, waiting for use, for this summer's return, and with it an explosion that will take him by surprise.